a lot of lawyers say one LLC to one property. And I think that that is very, very nice if you have 5 properties. I have 100.
Yeah.
I It's not going to work for me, right? And I think that
Hmm.
that sort of becomes the big thing is things are only protective if they're working. And if you
Right.
have one LLC to each property, but you're not doing your bookkeeping right, you're not consolidating your books, you're not using QuickBooks, you're not doing all of that, then it's good as not having an LLC, right? Because the purpose of the liability protection is to act like a business. And I just don't think that that's feasible for those of us in the real estate industry. I think it's really feasible for somebody who has one, great, but I have 100 and that becomes difficult. So for me, I usually do a little bit of a hybrid where I do LLCs for my rentals, regardless if they're short term or long term hold, but I divide them with the amount of equity that I have in the properties. So I basically have like, you know, if I have $10 of equity in 10 properties, they're going in one LLC, and maybe the next 10 that I have are worth $6. So I have more room to have more properties in that LLC. But the reason I do it that way is that if I do end up in a legal situation in that one company or that one LLC that I have structured, I can sort of cut it off from the chain of things that I have.
Mm.
And the rest of it is not really growing down. And I have basically all of my what I call client or consumer facing businesses in their own LLCs. And the reason I do that is because if you sue me for the law firm or the real estate firm or anything else, it's a consumer based business. It's going to stand on its own. My rental properties stand in their own LLCs. All of it pays into a holding company. And that holding company, nobody really knows the name of. So at any given time, my revenue going into my businesses is never really high. So for example, just for easy numbers, right? Let's say I have $10 worth of profit going into LLC one, $10 worth of profit going across the board. Every month when I'm done, those companies have about $2 in their bank account. The holding company gets paid almost like a service fee for the profits. That's where I make my money. The holding company is holding everything. It's paying my mortgage. It's paying, my cars that are business entities. Nobody can really identify that business because it's not registered in the state where my consumer-based businesses are. It's registered in Wyoming or Nevada. And I pay myself a W-2 paycheck there as well. So
Mm.
the holding company is actually not running a profit either, because by the time it pays off everything and pays me a W-2, I'm not paying business taxes. I'm now paying personal taxes. And then that's all. The holding company is owned by my trust. So on paper, I actually have very little profit. Across the board, all the businesses are running their own business expenses. They're consumer facing. So if I end up getting sued, I'm not quite worried about losing that business or entity. The holding company is holding most of the money. And even that's kind of strategically structured.
Wow. Interesting. Okay. And I've heard of this structure with the holding company before. I personally don't have that structure, but I know several people who do. I guess what's the big advantage to that? And then is that a corporation or is that taxed as a pass through as well?
So that's a corporation.
Okay.
And the big benefit for that is that I literally just I get to have all of my businesses that are consumer facing. They're protected with insurance. I'm not really worried about ever getting audited. Even if I get audited, even if you want to look at my profit structure, I've limited that liability to that company. And because it's consumer facing, I know that that's sort of not where my money's going to go. And the holding company is so hard to identify. I feel a little bit more comfortable having kind of my big lucid structure there. On paper, because I don't own anything personally, if you sue me personally for fraud or anything like that, good luck getting anything because I have a trust, I have a holding company, I have multiple LLCs. And the way I sort of say it is I've structured these walls. So good luck finding where all of my income actually is.
Yeah, got it. Okay. So if like let's say somebody wanted to sue you in the law firm, they couldn't really name your holding company because it's so difficult to find. So
Correct.
okay, and that's where all the money flows up to. So it's a way to really shield your assets a lot better.
Right. And if you look up, where I live, or you look up my house, or you look up my cars, they're owned by my title, I'm sorry, by my trust, and my trust is private. So nobody's really entitled to see what's in the trust except for what you find on public record.
I see.
So if you ask me, well, what holding company is in your trust, I don't have to provide that information even in a subpoena.
Mm, I see. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Wow. Okay. And then for the LLCs, you mentioned, you divide it based on the equity, which makes sense because that's typically what they're going after in a lawsuit when there is one. But what happens like over time? Obviously, equity changes, values increase. Do you reshuffle your assets then and like move them, quit claim them to another LLC, or how do you handle that situation?
It really depends. So I also look at kind of the structures and what I'm doing. Am I doing a long-term hold? Am I doing, short-term hold? What am I going to do with the property? I have a couple of properties that I know are going to go to my kids. So I kind of look at both equity and kind of the goals. I don't really do quitclaim deeds from one LLC to the other because, at least in the state of Maryland, that's still considered a consideration type of quitclaim. So I would have to pay
Mm,
taxes on it. So I wouldn't do that. I would just grow another LLC. If I'm doing any sort of fix and flip, which is, I do a lot of those as well. All of my fix and flips are LLCs that I start and close when that transaction's done, because again, that is a high threshold liability level.
got it. Okay. And are those LLCs where you do fix and flips, is that a S corp or is that a pass through?
It's passed through in the state of Maryland. It has a resident agent, can't find who I am. So that way, open, close, move on. So that way, I'm not worried about any liability, because you have to remember, for a lot of the statute of limitations, at least in the state of Maryland, and I think in a lot of other states, it's based on discovery of an issue, not when you did the fix and flip. So
Mm,
if a seller has, if a new buyer's in the property for 3 years and they discover an issue, my statute is now 3 years from that time. And I could have 10 other properties in that time frame, and now all of a sudden I'm screwing myself. So I just do open, close at the same time, call it a day, so that way I know that the liability threshold on that is going to end for the time frame that it existed.
oh wow. Okay. Interesting. So for someone who's just starting out, then what would be the starting structure? Do they start with getting a holding company and an LLC for their, say they're buying their first rental property, and then what state do you recommend filing both of those in?
So I would recommend an LLC to start with, and I would start in the state that you're in. I would not get too fancy with it, because that's, again, consumer facing. You want to have your insurance, you want to have your rental insurance, your umbrella policy, all of that to cover you for worst case. I actually wouldn't go to a holding company next, just because you're not going to be very profitable in the beginning. What I would do is I would do actually a personal trust for your personal assets, and I would have those kind of own the LLC and kind of pay into your into your trust directly. And then as you advance and you have more money coming in, then I would do the holding company as sort of that piecemeal between the two.
Okay, got it. And when you say pay into your trust, like just pay you personally, but it's your list, all your assets are listed in on the
Into the
trust.
trust.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and I know people local to Maryland have heard me say this repeatedly. When I talk about trust, I sort of say that, if you think about a backpack, everything you're born in goes into this backpack, whatever it is. So your personal structure goes into that. Your anything that has a monetary value. When you have a rental property, that's equivalent of putting a water bottle in there. And if you don't have it in a business structure, when you get sued, the idea really is that I'm taking a knife and I'm just kind of stabbing inside the bag.
Mm,
If I pierce the water bottle, all of your personal assets are getting wet. When you essentially have an LLC, that's the same as kind of having a knapsack inside the water bottle and then inside the bag. When you create a trust, what you're essentially doing is you're creating a brand new backpack. And you're saying, I don't own this backpack. It actually belongs to my child. It belongs to my kids. It belongs to somebody else, a third party that I'm gifting this entity I've created. But while I'm alive, I'm going to control it. They don't get this gift until I've passed. And then what I do is I take all of my personal assets and I put it into the trust. I remove it from the bag I'm born with and I put it into the trust. I leave the LLC inside that personal bag. So now if you pierce the corporate veil or you try to sue me and water spills into my personal assets, there's nothing in that bag. It's all in the trust.
mm,
Because I don't own the trust, it's actually just I control it. you can't really jump from one bag to the other unless you have a lot of proof that I was trying to avoid a lawsuit.
Got it. Okay. So for just an example, then you're driving down the street, you accidentally, or you get in a car accident and you're found to be at fault, personally.
Hmm.
If you have a trust, that's your personal property is owned by, if it's owned by the trust, your personal home would be protected in that case.
Correct. Yes. My
Yeah,
home would not be impacted because I don't own my home. So
got it.
if I'm at fault myself, only the items in my personal bag would be responsible. And for the lawyers listening to this, I do realize it's a lot more complex than that. I'm just, narrowing it down. There's lots of paperwork behind all of these assets. There's types of trusts, but that's essentially the idea is that on paper, Diana Khan doesn't own anything.
Yeah. How complicated for people who we just got our trust completed? It was long overdue. But how complicated should it be for somebody to expect, when they're setting up a trust?
If you're working with the right lawyer, it's really not that complicated. We just need to know all of your assets. And as long as you have that pretty well documented, your lawyer really should be doing most of the work. And then you should work with a good CPA that knows what they're doing. And, CPAs and lawyers and really anything are not all one size fits all, right? At least for trusts in the state of Maryland, just to kind of scare people, is like every lawyer can write a trust. We're not really required to like have a lot of knowledge, but they're the most litigated. So if your lawyer has never
Mm,
written a trust before, they're certainly not going to write a good one for somebody in real estate industry. So it's the
yeah.
same thing with CPAs. You don't really want to work with a CPA that focuses on, I don't know, veterinary clinics because they're not going to know the structure or setup that's going to work with the high liability structure of, rental income.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. And then one last question on entity formations. Do you ever recommend a series LLC?
I really don't. I feel like, I have some people who've done it. I feel like it's an outdated, antiquated way that investors used to do it. I think now there's a lot of more different ways we could do it that's taxed easier and looks better for your taxes. I know that investors used to have them a lot. I don't necessarily think they're a horrible idea. I just think that there's other better ways out there.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Well, you agree with my last attorney guest then, because that was one thing he was emphatic about is do not ever set up a series LLC, and he said it was going to be a nightmare for you. But sounds like you're not quite as emphatic, but you do agree with that as well.
I mean, listen, it's a I feel like I can't, as a lawyer, ever tell you there's one way to do things.
Yeah.
Because the truth of the matter is, you're going to come in my office for a few days and then you're going to leave. And if you're not practicing what you're supposed to be doing, no system's going to work. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
CRM system. It's the same thing, right? Like every
Mm-hmm.
CRM works as long as you're working it. And if you have a system that's not going to work for the way you're doing your business structure, I can set up the most safe thing in the world and it's not going to work for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And across all your real estate investor clients, what are the biggest mistakes that you see like pop up and that have caused the biggest heartache for landlords? And maybe it's again, it's different for short term versus long term rentals.
Gosh, a lot of the time it's a lot of, I think, at least in Maryland where I am, there's just a lot of issues with not having the proper entity structure and waiting too long. I think that's something that we all have sort of, me included. I'm going to put myself right out there. I did not expect to have 100 rental properties, right? Like I didn't expect to grow that fast, and I think we just kind of tumble and tumble and tumble, and next thing you know, we're like really big, and I think nobody expects it. It's really, you can go 5 years be like this and then in a year just kind of curtail, and people
Mm-hmm.
don't set themselves up until it's too late. And I think don't wait. That's the best advice I could do. Spend the money up front, invest in yourself, believe you're going to do it right, and then just do it right before problems arise, whether or
Yeah.
not it's short term or long term.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a great point too on the scaling, because I think everyone obviously starts with their first property, and then you think, oh, my goal is if I get 10 of these, I'm good to go. And then you get to 10, and you're like, this was fun. Like, what if we do 20? And then it
Right.
grows from there. So as people scale, it feels like to me like the risk level always goes up. I'm like, I can do more. I don't necessarily need to do more. Am I just creating more liability for myself? Um, are there different things you think people should be thinking about, landlords or rental property owners should be thinking about with 5 properties as opposed to 50 or 100 properties?
I think just scaling, right? Like when you scale anything, you need to think about how to make your life easier. And that looks very different at 5 properties than at 10. Self managing 5 properties, pretty easy. You want to get to 20, self managing is not going to work. And I think you have to figure out what are your values as you grow these, your investments. What are they? And always check in with them, because at 5 versus 15, it's very different. And I see a lot of investors get into this industry and they're like, oh, I can do failure to pay rents. Like I could go to courthouse all day. And I'm like, why would you want to? And they're like, well, you
Yeah.
do it. And I'm like, yeah, but I have a law firm. I have staff. Like as somebody who's doing these for a living, like what are your values? What are you doing this for? Are you doing this because you do want to spend, 3 hours in courthouse and bulk file 100 failure to pay rents? Or do you want to just be making passive income and retire at the age of 50? And neither answer is wrong, but figure out what your value structure is and base your business structure and your rental investments into that structure. If you're not really doing that, you're not investing in the right type of portfolio. Short-term rentals work really well if that's the value structure that you want to have. Long-term rentals work really well if that's the value structure you want to have. I'm only 36. I want to retire at the age of 50. For me right now, equity building is more important to me than having lots of money in my bank. And the reason being is because when I'm at 50, I want to be holding lots and lots of rentals and just living off of that and retiring off of that.
Yeah, living off rentals. There you go.
There you go.
Um, that's such a great point though, because I see the shiny object thing pop up so much. Like especially with new people, you talk to them and you're like, "So what are you investing in?" Well, anything that's a deal, and then they'll buy one office complex, one flex space, one commercial property, and then doing a flip at the same time, and don't really have a system for any of it. They're just kind of flying by the seat of their pants. But it's such a great point that like figure out the end game and then align your systems based on that. It makes a world of difference. I've found. Um,
Yep.
I think a
There's
lot of
there's a lot to
people.
be said. Sorry, there's a lot to be said about do a little bit of everything. Figure out what you like, figure out what you're good at.
Yeah,
I'm not turning you
absolutely.
away from that. There's I wouldn't have known I was good at commercial until, I bought my first, huge industry commercial building. You don't know
Hmm.
until you try, but if, give a commitment that's in line with your values and stay long enough to figure out if you're good at it, but don't stay over that.